So imagine trying to compress one of the most scrutinized, debated, and, well, really unorthodox leadership styles of the modern era.
Right.
And trying to fit all of that into just 10 absolute laws. I mean, you look at the sheer volume of decisions and the sudden pivots.
Oh, absolutely. The constant media saturation.
Exactly. The media saturation surrounding such a highly visible figure. You just have to wonder how anyone could possibly distill that chaotic energy into a neat, digestible framework.
It feels almost impossible.
Yeah. It feels like trying to map the trajectory of a hurricane using, just a ruler and a compass.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, it requires a really profound level of strategic taxonomy to even attempt that kind of distillation.
Right.
Because usually when the business world studies leadership, we rely on these heavily controlled environments.
Like case studies and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We analyze a CEO who is steering a legacy company through a very predictable market shift. Or, we look at military generals operating within literally centuries of established doctrine.
Right, where the rules are already laid out.
Exactly. The variables are known. But the moment you shift your focus to highly unorthodox, disruptive leaders.
The ones who just break all the rules.
Right, figures who actively dismantle established norms to gain an advantage. Well, those traditional blueprints just instantly disintegrate.
Yeah, they're useless.
You're no longer studying a chess match. You're studying someone who, flips the board and demands you play an entirely different game.
Which is wild. So welcome, everyone, to this special Best Book Summary edition of our deep dive. I'm super excited for this one.
Me too. It's going to be a fascinating breakdown.
Our mission today for the channel is to really unpack the framing, the underlying premise, and the core concept of a brand new release that attempts to do exactly what we were just talking about, map that hurricane.
Right.
We are looking at a brand new text titled Trump's 10 Commandments, Strategic Lessons in Leadership.
And we really need to set some ground rules before we get into the weeds here.
Yes, absolutely. Just a quick neutrality check for everyone watching or listening. Our approach to this deep dive is going to be strictly clinical.
Completely impartial.
Exactly. We are looking exclusively at the structural engineering of the ideas presented in the book. So, to be crystal clear, the goal here is neither to endorse nor criticize any of the political viewpoints associated with the subject.
Right. That's not what we do here.
No, not at all. We are simply extracting and evaluating the leadership and strategic concepts exactly as they are packaged by the authors. We're looking at how the framework is built, how it's handed to the reader, and the psychology of why this specific brand of leadership actually works, or why it might be super brittle.
Yeah, we are operating purely as analysts of strategy and behavioral economics today.
Right.
Because when you look at any highly polarizing subject, the immediate temptation for a reader is to just get caught up in the history or the public narratives.
The noise, basically.
Exactly, all the noise. But from a purely analytical standpoint, true strategic value is only unlocked when you strip away all that narrative and just examine the raw mechanics.
Like looking under the hood of a car.
Precisely. We're evaluating the utility, the psychological anchoring, and what this means for modern management.
Okay, so let's get right into it and start with the title. Because the primary title of this book is, well, it carries massive weight. Trump's 10 Commandments, Strategic Lessons in Leadership.
It really does.
Choosing the phrase 10 Commandments for a business or strategy book is just an incredibly aggressive rhetorical maneuver.
Oh, totally.
You don't use that phrase casually on a dust jacket unless you're deliberately trying to trigger something very specific in your audience.
No, you're tapping into thousands of years of historical and cultural anchoring when you do that.
Religious anchoring too, obviously.
Exactly. When an author uses the framework of a commandment, they are engaging in this practice we call authoritative anchoring.
Authoritative anchoring. Okay, break that down for me.
So they are deliberately bypassing the part of the reader's brain that looks for, helpful suggestions or best practices.
Right.
And instead, they're appealing directly to this deep human desire for absolute certainty.
Oh, wow. Because people crave certainty.
Especially now. In an era of profound macroeconomic instability, supply chain fragility, rapid tech disruption.
Everything is constantly changing.
Right. Certainty is the ultimate luxury good in the business world right now. So a commandment offers this illusion of impenetrable stability.
Yeah, it implies that these aren't just passing hints. They are foundational, non-negotiable laws.
Absolutely.
But I've got to push back on that a little bit.
Sure.
Because calling leadership advice commandments is I don't know, it's like calling a family recipe a sacred text.
Yeah.
It completely elevates how you're supposed to treat it. But does framing business strategies as commandments actually make them harder to apply in the real world? Because the real world of leadership is messy.
It's very messy.
And flexibility is usually the key, right? If you set a definitive, uncompromising tone before you even turn to page 1, doesn't that trap you?
Well, it's an interesting tension. In the broader landscape of business publishing, we're so conditioned to expect titles like 7 Habits or
5 Dysfunctional.
yeah, or Core Principles, and words like habits, principles, guidelines. They all imply a fluid framework.
Something you can mold.
Exactly. An architecture you can adapt or scale based on your industry. But a commandment, that demands total obedience.
It's rigid.
It suggests an inflexible architecture where any deviation threatens the whole strategy. The psychology here relies on the premise that the rule is larger than the individual executing it.
Which is a crazy power dynamic.
It really is.
Yeah.
If a leader adopts a framework of principles, they retain the autonomy to bend them when a crisis hits.
Right.
But if they operate under a system of commandments, they are projecting this aura of complete infallibility.
Wow.
The message is that the leader isn't reacting to the room. The leader is forcing the room to bend to these absolute laws.
It's highly aggressive.
Extremely aggressive. It communicates extreme confidence, which is often used to unnerve competitors or, subjugate negotiations before they even start.
But let's test the viability of that in the real world, because framing strategies as commandments just seems incredibly dangerous to me.
How so?
Well, I look at it like the relationship between gravity and aerospace engineering.
Right. Okay, I like that.
Gravity is a commandment. It is an immutable law of physics. You literally cannot negotiate with gravity.
Right, it's an absolute...
But if you only obey gravity, you never fly.
Exactly.
You have to use the flexible principles of aerodynamics, lift, thrust, drag, to actually navigate within the constraints of that absolute law.
That's a perfect analogy.
So if you lock your entire leadership strategy into 10 unbreakable laws, aren't you essentially building an airplane out of solid lead?
Yes, you are.
Because the moment the market shifts or some black swan event happens, that rigidity guarantees you're going to crash.
Right. And that aerospace analogy perfectly illustrates the cognitive dissonance at the heart of this kind of dogmatic leadership.
Let's hear it.
Think about it. If rule number 3 of your corporate strategy is never retreat, always double down.
Which is a very common type of aggressive rule.
Right. What happens when you are hemorrhaging capital in a failed market expansion?
You're losing money fast.
A calculated retreat might be the only mathematical way to save the company. But the leader who publicly anchored themselves to a commandment of never retreat is now trapped.
Trapped by their own dogma.
Exactly. They face a devastating choice. Either adhere strictly to the commandment and drive the company into bankruptcy,
Which is insane.
or they publicly break the commandment.
And if they break it?
Then they signal to the market, the shareholders, and their competitors that the entire philosophical framework was a bluff.
Right. Breaking a commandment doesn't just damage that specific deal. It shatters that whole aura of infallibility you were talking about earlier.
Precisely. Once that illusion of absolute certainty is pierced, the leader loses all the psychological leverage that the commandment created in the first place.
Man, that creates a massive paradox for the reader. If you're watching this deep dive or reading this book genuinely trying to learn, you crave that clarity.
Oh, everyone wants the easy rule.
Yeah, you want the cognitive ease of an easy-to-remember rule. But reality is just this complex system of intersecting variables. It's not a blank slate.
Which forces us to ask what the authors are actually trying to achieve here with this specific linguistic framing.
Okay, yeah. What's the diagnosis?
By defining this unorthodox style through the lens of commandments, they're suggesting that the power of this strategy doesn't come from its adaptability.
Where does it come from then?
It's sheer, relentless brute force.
Oh, wow.
It's the strategy of the battering ram, not the lockpick. The commandment is effective precisely because it is unreasonable.
Because it's unreasonable. Okay, explain that.
When you adhere to an uncompromising position in a negotiation, you force the other party to do all the adapting, all the compromising, all the cognitive labor.
Wow, you just stand still and make them run around you.
Exactly.
But wait, that makes the shift in the book's extended subtitles so incredibly jarring to me.
The subtitle is fascinating.
Yeah, because you spend all this time establishing the sheer force of these absolute laws, these commandments, and then you read the full subtitle.
Strategic lessons from the Trump leadership toolbox.
Right, a toolbox. We just went from like Mount Sinai and sacred texts straight to a metaphorical hardware store.
It's a massive pivot.
I mean, how are you supposed to reconcile those two ideas? You can't just put a commandment back in a toolbox when it doesn't suit you.
You're highlighting a really profound philosophical contradiction here. It completely alters the strategic taxonomy of the book.
Yeah, because a toolbox implies utility.
Utilitarian nature versus the epistemological nature of a commandment. They represent completely opposing schools of thought.
Right, because if I open a toolbox on a job site, I don't pull out a wrench and swear absolute allegiance to it.
No, of course not.
I assess the environment, I look at whether it's a plumbing leak or an electrical fault, and I pick the exact instrument engineered for that problem.
And then what do you do when the problem is solved?
I put the tool back in the box. It has no moral weight. It's just useful for that one moment.
Exactly. So the toolbox metaphor introduces the concept of cognitive flexibility.
Which completely subverts the rigidity of the commandments.
Yes. The authors are presenting this hybrid framework. They are blending dogmatic, absolute laws with hyper-pragmatic situational instruments.
Which sounds crazy on the surface.
It reads as a total contradiction. But if we dig into the mechanics of high-level strategy, we can see how these two forces actually synthesize into a really potent model.
Okay, I need a concrete example of this. Because right now, it feels like telling a CEO they must rigidly follow a script while simultaneously improvising every single line.
Let's build out a hypothetical scenario then.
Okay, say we have a listener who is a startup founder. They're navigating a highly volatile Series B funding round. How do they operationalize this contradiction?
Okay, great example. So the founder is facing immense pressure. VCs, competitors, internal product delays.
Total chaos.
Right. In this framework, the commandment operates as the foundational mindset, the macro philosophy that cannot be violated under any circumstances.
Okay, what's the commandment in this scenario?
Let's say commandment number 4 is always control the narrative architecture.
Always control the narrative. Got it.
That is absolute. The founder must never allow the investors or the media to dictate the framing of the company's value.
So that's the unyielding law of gravity in their strategic universe.
Precisely. The goal is non-negotiable. But the toolbox represents the micro-tactics used to achieve that macro philosophy on any given day.
Ah, okay. The tools are how you obey the commandment.
Exactly. So on Monday, controlling the narrative might require the founder to use the hammer.
What's the hammer?
A loud, aggressive press release explicitly calling out a competitor's flaws to completely dominate the news cycle. The tool is blunt force.
Right. But wait, on Thursday, blunt force might alienate a really crucial conservative institutional investor, someone who prefers quiet competence.
Exactly. So on Thursday, the founder puts the hammer away.
They grab a different tool.
Right. They reach into the toolbox for the scalpel. They selectively leak a highly technical, nuanced internal memo to a respected industry journal.
Projecting quiet brilliance instead of loud aggression.
Yes. The tactical application, the tool, has completely changed.
Yeah.
It went from loud to quiet.
Broad to targeted.
But the overarching commandment controlling the narrative architecture remains completely intact and unviolated.
Wow. So the tools are disposable, but the commandment is immortal.
You nailed it.
You know, that distinction really separates amateur strategists from apex operators.
How so?
Because amateurs fall in love with the tool.
Oh, that's so true.
Right. Like, they get a great result from an aggressive press release, so they assume aggression is the actual commandment.
And then they apply it to everything.
Exactly. They start hitting everything with the hammer, employee disputes, vendor negotiations, board meetings, until they shatter a fragile relationship that actually needed a scalpel.
They confuse the temporary tactic with the permanent philosophy.
Yes. Which is exactly the danger of studying unorthodox leadership without a rigorous framework like we're doing right now.
Because the public rarely sees the underlying commandment.
Right. They only see the spectacle.
They see the flash of the tool being deployed. When a highly visible leader acts erratically or makes a seemingly contradictory statement, the public narrative just dismisses it as chaos.
They just say, oh, this person has no plan.
But through the lens of this commandment toolbox synthesis, That perceived chaos is actually extreme tactical elasticity.
They are just rapidly swapping tools in real time.
Exactly, all to maintain adherence to an invisible commandment.
Man, that requires a massive amount of discipline from the reader, though.
It does.
You're asking the listener to pick up this book, observe an incredibly polarizing, highly publicized action, and then reverse engineer it to find the dull, mechanical truth underneath.
You have to look at the spectacle and ask, what underlying law of physics is this spectacle serving right now?
Right. It demands an engineer's mindset.
Totally. You cannot consume this material passively or emotionally.
Which is hard for a lot of people.
If you read a book outlining 10 commandments of a highly unorthodox leader, and your primary emotional response is either unquestioning adulation or visceral rejection,
You've missed the point entirely.
you have entirely missed the educational value of the text. You're basically reacting to the paint color of the building, rather than studying the load-bearing capacity of the steel beams inside the walls.
I love that analogy. The true utility is mapping the architecture of the decisions, regardless of how you feel about the architect. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. I want to look at the physical and temporal context of how these ideas are being delivered to the market, because the medium is often just as strategic as the message itself.
Oh, absolutely. The format tells a story.
Let's lay out the core data for the audience. The book is authored by Jeffrey Sonnenfeld and Stephen Tien, and it was released as a hardcover just 5 days ago. Today is April 5th, 2026, and this dropped on March 31st, 2026.
We are analyzing this in real time.
Literally live ammunition. This isn't some historical retrospective written by an academic looking back from the safety of, the 2050s.
Right. And that temporal proximity is a really critical factor in how we have to evaluate the text.
Why is that so critical?
Well, when authors attempt to codify the strategy of an active contemporary figure, they're engaging in real-time synthesis.
They don't have the benefit of hindsight.
Exactly. They lack the clarifying filter of historical distance, which means they have to be incredibly aggressive in their pattern recognition.
Oh, I see. They are trying to identify permanent commandments while the subject is literally still pulling tools out of the box on the daily news cycle.
Yes. It's a very difficult tightrope to walk.
Which makes the choice to publish this as a traditional hardcover so fascinating to me.
Tell me more about that.
Well, we operate in a media ecosystem defined by digital transience, right?
Everything is fleeting.
If a business analyst or a strategist wants to put out a framework today, the default mechanisms are frictionless. You write a Substack article, you do a serialized audio series, or a rapid-fire digital download, maybe a soft cover.
It's all about speed.
But choosing to print a physical, heavy hardcover in 2026, that is a deliberate act of authoritative signaling.
It's the publishing equivalent of carving a doctrine into stone.
Yes.
A hardcover book carries intrinsic psychological weight.
Yeah.
It is designed to literally anchor a physical bookshelf.
It demands space on a CEO's desk.
By bypassing that transient digital ecosystem and going straight to hardcover, Sonnenfeld and Tien are making a meta-strategic claim about the durability of their own analysis.
Oh, that's so meta. I love it.
They're signaling to the reader that the framework they've extracted is not just a fleeting hot take.
It's not just a reaction to yesterday's headlines.
Right. They are asserting that these 10 commandments and this specific leadership toolbox possess long-term permanent utility.
And it fundamentally changes how the reader interacts with the material.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you read a thread on social media about leadership strategy, your brain processes it as disposable information.
Sure, you just swipe past it.
You consume it, you agree or disagree, and you instantly scroll to the next thing. The medium trains your brain to treat the information as temporary.
But when you hold a physical book,
When you physically hold a hardcover, the tactile experience commands a totally different level of cognitive engagement. You are holding a codified record.
and the collaborative nature of that codified record really warrants some deep examination too.
Right, because we have two authors here.
Sonnenfeld and Tien. They are attempting to distill the essence of a single, highly idiosyncratic leader.
Which has to be incredibly tough.
The primary challenge in that kind of collaboration is filtering the signal from the deafening noise.
Right. Especially with highly unorthodox, visible leaders, whether they're in business, tech, or the public sector, they generate this massive, almost impenetrable aura of static.
Oh, the static is constant. Public controversies, media spin, cults of personality, daily headlines.
So how do Sonnenfeld and Tien actually successfully pierce that static?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If the spectacle is that loud, how do you know if you are actually observing a genuine strategic commandment, or if you're just analyzing a leader's momentary mood swing that happened to get caught on camera?
You have to follow the allocation of resources, not the rhetoric.
Ooh, say that again.
Follow the allocation of resources, not the rhetoric. Talk is frictionless.
Right, talk is cheap.
Exactly. A leader can deploy a rhetorical tool in a press conference or a social media post that generates endless noise, but requires zero actual capital or structural commitment.
It's just a distraction.
If you want to find the true commandments of a leader, you look at where they spend their finite resources, their time, their capital, and their institutional leverage.
Okay, give me a mechanism for that, like practically. How does a listener apply that filter when they are trying to extract lessons from, say, a volatile boss or a chaotic competitor?
You apply a simple heuristic. Does the action match the expenditure?
Okay, action matching expenditure.
Let's say a leader publicly declares that innovation is our absolute highest priority. They frame it as a commandment.
Right, you hear that all the time in corporate jargon.
But if you look closely, their R&D budget is shrinking while their marketing budget is expanding. In that case, the public declaration is merely noise. The actual hidden commandment is perception over product. The analyst's job and the author's job in this book is to ignore the public declaration of innovation and codify the hidden law of perception. You track the movement of the money, the shifting of personnel, the structural reorganizations. That is where the genuine strategy lives.
That is a phenomenal filter. It forces you to ask whether the strategy you are studying is actually reproducible.
Exactly.
Because if a specific tool only works for one specific leader in one specific decade, relying entirely on their unique celebrity status or leverage,
then it's completely useless to the reader.
it's not a strategic lesson at all. It's just an unrepeatable historical anomaly.
Transferability is the ultimate litmus test for any framework presented in a book like this.
Right.
If Sonnenfeld and Tien have successfully executed their premise, the 10 commandments they outline cannot rely on the reader possessing the exact same leverage, wealth, or public profile as the subject.
Because none of us do.
Exactly. The core mechanics of the strategy have to be stripped of the subject's personality and mapped onto an entirely different environment.
Let's test that transferability right now. Let's take a common hallmark of unorthodox leadership, the deliberate cultivation of unpredictability.
Okay, great one.
A leader uses erratic behavior to keep competitors off balance, right? To dominate the ODA, loop, observe, orient, decide, act.
Yes, very common tactic.
But how does a mid-level project manager or like a small business owner take this commandment of unpredictability and deploy it without just looking like an incompetent, chaotic manager who can't keep a schedule?
That's the trap a lot of people fall into. The project manager has to extract the physics of the strategy, not the aesthetic.
The physics, not the aesthetic. Okay, explain the difference.
The aesthetic of unpredictability is chaos. It's yelling, missing deadlines, throwing tantrums in meetings.
Which gets you fired.
Exactly. Adopting the aesthetic leads to immediate termination in a normal corporate environment. But the physics of unpredictability is calculated disruption.
So how do they deploy the physics?
They map the rigid expectations of their specific environment, and they surgically violate them to create leverage.
Okay, give me a scenario.
So the manager is negotiating an internal resource allocation. The historical expectation is that every department is going to submit a standard defensive budget proposal and fight for marginal, tiny increments.
Everyone expects a boring war of attrition.
Right. That is the predictable environment. So the manager deploys the tool of calculated disruption by completely upending the format.
What do?
They submit a proposal that voluntarily cuts their own budget in legacy areas while aggressively demanding absolute control over an experimental new vertical.
Oh, wow. They completely shatter the cognitive template of the negotiation.
Exactly. The opposing parties entered the room prepared for a defensive war. The manager deployed unpredictability to force everyone into a completely new paradigm where the manager sets the baseline.
They use the tool of disruption to serve the commandment of controlling the narrative architecture.
Yes. And they didn't need billions of dollars or a massive public platform to do it. They just needed to understand the mechanics of the strategy and apply it to their specific scale.
That brings the entire premise of the book into incredibly sharp focus. The value of this text doesn't lie in teaching you how to replicate the subject's personality.
Not at all.
The value lies in exposing the skeletal structure of how power, leverage, and disruption operate at the absolute highest levels.
And giving you the conceptual vocabulary to apply those mechanics in your own arena.
Right. It equips the reader with a much more sophisticated lens through which to view leadership dynamics.
Once you understand that interplay between rigid commandments and flexible toolboxes, you really stop reacting emotionally to the decisions made above you.
You start analyzing them structurally.
You begin to anticipate the tactical shifts because you understand the underlying laws governing them.
Which brings us perfectly back to the core takeaways of this best book summary deep dive. We have unpacked the profound cognitive tension at the absolute center of Trump's 10 Commandments. Strategic lessons in leadership.
We've explored the psychological gravity of authoritative anchoring.
Right. How framing leadership as non-negotiable commandments creates an illusion of certainty and literally forces opponents to absorb all the cognitive load of adaptation.
And we counterbalance that rigidity by exploring the concept of cognitive flexibility found in the leadership toolbox.
The hammer and the scalpel.
Exactly. We demonstrated how apex operators synthesize these two opposing forces, utilizing highly elastic, disposable tactical tools to serve unyielding, immortal, strategic laws.
We also dissected the deliberate authoritative signaling behind releasing this framework as a physical hardcover in the digital age.
The medium as the message.
And we provided a real heuristic for separating the raw mechanics of a strategy from the deafening noise of public spectacle, following the money and resources over the rhetoric.
It's a rigorous, demanding framework that really requires the reader to operate as a structural engineer of human behavior.
It demands an absolute suspension of bias in pursuit of pure strategic utility.
Which is incredibly hard, but completely necessary.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to process as you navigate your own professional environment this week.
I love this part.
Look closely at the dynamics of power around you, the unwritten rules, the corporate mandates dictating the decisions in your workplace.
Let's case the noise.
If you were forced to reverse engineer your own company's strategy or the operational methodology of your direct bosses into a list of core commandments, what would you actually find?
What are the hidden laws?
Are the rules governing your environment actually unbreakable, immutable laws of business physics? Or are they simply highly effective situational tools that have been cleverly disguised as absolute laws to project authority and enforce compliance?
Determining the difference between a law and a tool is really the first step in learning how to rewrite the rules yourself.
It changes the entire architecture of how you operate. So if you found this rigorous analytical breakdown valuable and you want to continue exploring the hidden mechanics of high-level strategy, make sure to subscribe to the Best Book Summary channel. We don't just read the dust jackets here. We dismantle the engine. Drop a comment below and let us know where you fall on the ultimate strategic divide.
I'm really curious to read the comments on this one.
Me too. Do you believe the most resilient leaders rely on unyielding commandments or an infinitely adaptable toolbox? We analyze every perspective. Stay tuned for our next deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
Because whether you are deciphering the chaotic maneuvers of a global leader or just trying to navigate the complexities of your own boardroom, the greatest advantage you can possess is the ability to see the blueprint when everyone else is only staring at the building. Catch you next time.